Today, the market has heard from Ray Dalio when he broke out his bubble indicator. Based on Dalio's estimation, about 5% of the top 1,000 companies in the U.S. were priced at unsustainable levels. Dalio stated he has seen a lot of bubbles and has studied the history. And based on that history, Dalio has created a proprietary system that tracks 6 measures, including prices relative to traditional measures, new buyers, and leverage. And although he sees a very big divergence among stocks today, he said his overall bubble gauge for the U.S. stock market is around the 77th percentile. That compares to 100th percentile readings that occurred in the bubbles seen in 2000 and 1929. Does that mean we're not in a bubble and everything is awesome? Well, let's take a look. So here's a list of the 6 measures used by Dalio. And number 1, how high are prices relative to traditional measures? Number 2, are prices discounting unsustainable conditions? Number 3, how many new buyers, meaning those who weren't previously in the market, have entered the market? Number 4, how broadly bullish is sentiment? Number 5, are purchases being financed by high leverage? And number 6, have buyers made exceptionally extended forward purchases? And that's talking about built inventory and contracted forward purchases, etc. And have they done this to speculate or protect themselves against future price gains? And each of these 6 influences is measured using a number of stats and then are combined into gauges, and those gauges are combined into aggregate indices by security and then for the market as a whole. And the table that you see here shows the current readings of each of these gauges going back to 1910 with the current readings at the far right of the screen. So in this video, we're going to look at items 3, 4, and 5 since they're the ones that are indicated to be in bubble territory. And the others, frothy, and somewhat frothy, well, you might have to go to Starbucks for that. So let's continue. And beginning here with the third gauge, how many new buyers have entered the market? And the theory here is that a rush of new investors into the market attracted by rising prices is often indicative of a bubble. This is because they typically enter the market because it's hot and because they're newbies. And this was the case both in 1929 and 2000, those equity bubbles. The current rating of the gauge has reached the 95th percentile. If you go back to the period, though, of 1960 to 1970, which is at the far left of the chart, the readings were very high for an extended period. So one lesson is that we might be able to hang up here for quite some time. But of course, it was followed by an extended period of low readings. And that is the lesson for this gauge. The fourth gauge is how broadly bullish is sentiment. And the theory is that the more bullish the sentiment, then most people have likely already invested. And this leads to lower subsequent investments or the increased probability that the investors that are in will sell. And as you can see, the current aggregate market sentiment gauge is now reading around the 85th percentile. And the investment appears to be heavily concentrated in the bubble stocks rather than most stocks. And the bubble stocks are many of the recent IPOs and perhaps many of the big tech stocks, at least by the action in today's market. And the fifth gauge are purchases being financed by high leverage. And the theory is that leveraged purchases are weaker and more vulnerable to forced selling if we have a bad turn in the market. And the leverage gauge, which looks at the leverage dynamics across all key players and treats option positions as a form of leverage, is now showing a read just shy of the 80th percentile. And like some of our other bubble measures, there's a high leverage being deployed by the newbie retail investors using options in those bubble stocks we talked about. And at the same time, there is much less leverage by other investors in non-bubble stocks. So there you are. Everything is awesome. And for today, that's ChewDog Charts. Thank you.